I always thought the forest was empty, just trees and shadows, but the night I found the black orchid, I learned how wrong I was. The leaves whispered, the wind carried voices I couldn't understand, and something moved just beyond my sight. It wasn't human, it wasn't anything I knew, and it was watching me, guided by something older, darker, something I can only call a witch. I remember the first time I set foot in the Black Orchid forest, as if the mist itself had marked the memory in my bones. It was late afternoon, yet the thick canopy above smothered the sunlight until the world felt permanently dim. The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic, something that made my stomach twist with unease. Every step I took crunched against rotting leaves, yet I could swear the forest was listening, that the shadows leaned closer to watch me. The locals had warned me about this place, murmuring about disappearances, whispers of the witch of the Black Orchid. But I had laughed. I had believed in reason, in logic, in the safety of knowing the world was predictable. That belief ended the moment the mist curled around my ankles and refused to dissipate. A chill ran through me, unnatural and sharp, like ice sliding under my skin. It was then I heard it. A soft humming chant, low, guttural, barely audible, not carried by the wind, but inside my head, as if the forest itself were speaking to me. I froze. My rational mind tried to convince me it was the wind playing tricks, but my chest tightened with panic. The chant grew louder, weaving through the trees in patterns my brain could not follow. Then I saw it. A figure among the trunks, blacker than the shadows themselves, moving in a way no human could. Its limbs were too long, bending with a fluidity that made my stomach churn. For a brief instant, I thought I glimpsed eyes, red, molten, burning with intelligence. And then the figure vanished, swallowed by the fog, leaving only a rustle of leaves and the echo of that terrible chant. I tried to move, to convince myself that if I walked faster, the fear would dissolve. But the forest had other plans. Branches clawed at my jacket, roots grabbed at my boots, and every step felt heavier than the last. The air grew thicker, oppressive, as if the black orchid itself was alive and breathing around me. The humming voice escalated, twisting into words I almost understood. Come to me. I stumbled into a clearing and saw them. Black orchids, dozens of them, swaying though there was no breeze. Their petals glimmered faintly, slick as obsidian, dripping with a sap that gleamed like blood in the dim light. My throat went dry. The chant swelled, now unmistakably female, lilting and cruel, promising power, protection, safety, or death. I realized then that the figure, the presence I had glimpsed, was not separate from these flowers. The black orchid was her creation, her sentinel, and she, the witch, was here older than memory, her body unseen, but her will threading through every leaf and shadow. I tried to turn back, but the forest seemed endless, mist coiled around me, twisting into shapes, faces, hands, eyes. And with every glance, I thought I saw her. A woman draped in black, hair flowing like ink, eyes like pits that reflected nothing but fear. The deeper I walked, the more I felt her watching, judging, weighing my worth. And the orchids, they seemed to lean toward her command, moving like predators. Their scent, sickly sweet, clawed at my senses, making my head swim. My hands shook as I gripped a branch for support. I whispered prayers I barely remembered, mumbling names of saints and spirits, though I knew they would not save me. The witch, I realized, did not fear gods. She feared nothing mortal. Her power was ancient, drawn from the forest, from the black orchid itself, and she could twist it however she wished. Every shadow, every sound, every twitch of a leaf reminded me that I was being hunted, not by flesh, but by something far older, far crueler than any human. Night was falling, though the fog made it impossible to see. I felt the forest press in closer, the ground trembling under some hidden weight. Somewhere behind me, the humming rose into a scream, agonized, triumphant, eternal. I wanted to run, but the forest shifted beneath my feet, roots writhing like serpents, I dared not look back, yet the feeling of being watched burned into the back of my neck, clawing into my soul. The Black Orchid had found me, and the witch had marked me. I whispered to myself, trying to summon courage, though every instinct screamed at me to flee. Somewhere ahead, through the thickening mist, I thought I saw a dim glow. Light, perhaps safety, perhaps another trap. But the forest had a hunger, and I knew the witch would not allow me to leave without testing me first. I took a shaky step forward, and that was when I heard her laugh. Low, cruel, echoing through the mist and trees, wrapping around me like a snake. Not human, not quite, and yet terrifyingly alive. I ran blindly, branches slashing my face, roots clawing at my ankles, but the forest seemed endless. The mist wrapped around me like a living thing, thickening with each step, smothering my senses. I could hear her, always wheeze, just behind me, not breathing like a human, but sliding through the shadows, coiling around the trunks, speaking without words. The whispering rose and fell, twisting in rhythms that set my teeth on edge. You cannot leave. You cannot hide. Then the trees themselves shifted. No wind blew, yet their trunks bent, roots twisting, forming shapes that blocked my path. I stumbled into a clearing, and my heart froze. The ground was littered with remnants of those who had come before. Brittle bones, tattered clothing, and black orchids sprouting from the earth where blood had soaked in long ago. The smell of decay wrapped around me, suffocating, intoxicating. I wanted to turn back, but the forest had already decided. I could not retreat. A figure emerged from the mist. She was impossibly tall, draped in black, her hair flowing like spilled ink, tangled with the vines of the forest. Her eyes burned like coals in a hearth of darkness. I felt her presence in my bones before I saw her, a weight pressing down, demanding obedience. The orchids at her feet leaned toward her as if drawn by her will. I realized with a shiver that she was part of the forest itself. Each leaf, each shadow, each whispered wind carried her intent. "You should not have come here," she said, her voice both velvet and razor, curling into my ears like smoke. I could not speak, could not move, my limbs frozen by terror and awe. Her laughter followed, a high, keening sound that seemed to pierce my very skull. But perhaps, "I will test you." The ground beneath me shivered and the roots twisted upward, forming a lattice that lifted me off my feet. I dangled helplessly, swaying above the earth like prey in a hunter's trap. The orchids around her pulsed faintly, glowing, their petals curling toward me as if tasting my fear. She circled me slowly, her gaze appraising, hungry, patient. Every step she took bent the fog, curling it into spirals that reached for me. "You carry fear in your heart," she whispered, tilting her head. "Fear is delicious, but courage is rare. Let us see if you are worth the forest's mercy." The air thickened. Shadows stretched unnaturally, turning into hands, faces, crawling shapes that clawed at the edge of vision. The wind screamed through the trees, carrying voices of those who had failed this trial before me. I realized they were trapped, spirits bound to the orchids, their despair feeding her power, their sorrow woven into the forest itself. I shivered violently, sweat and blood running down my arms, and felt the first true brush of despair press into my chest. Then she raised a hand, long, twisted fingers curling like branches. The orchids pulsed violently, and the shadows leapt at me. I had no weapon, no shield, only the pounding of my heart and a prayer I barely remembered from childhood. "Please, let me survive," I whispered, though I did not know who I was praying to. The shadows twisted closer, hissing, whispering, their voices fragments of pain and rage. And then something inside me snapped. Fear turned into defiance. I shouted a raw, ragged scream, and the shadows recoiled, hissing like startled snakes. The witch's eyes flared, her form twisting with anger, her scream echoing like 1,000 branches breaking at once. The orchids trembled, their glow brighter, but my scream cut through them, slicing a small path through the mist. She laughed, a low, cruel sound. "Interesting." "Very interesting," she said. "Few survived their first trial." Her gaze softened, just slightly, as if acknowledging my stubbornness. "But this forest is patient, and I am patient." Then the mist shifted, clearing a narrow path. The roots uncurled just enough for me to step down. The weight on my chest lifted slightly, though I knew it had not left me entirely. Her presence remained, a cold, omnipresent pressure that promised she would be waiting. I stumbled, fell, and scrambled forward, never daring to look back. The chanting faded, but I could still feel her eyes burning into my back, marking me, remembering me. I did not stop until I broke from the edge of the Black Orchid forest into a narrow valley bathed in pale moonlight. Only then did I allow myself to collapse, gasping, shaking uncontrollably. My legs were scraped, my hands torn, and my shirt soaked with sweat and blood. Yet even in that fleeting safety, I could not forget her. The witch of the Black Orchid had found me, had judged me, and, if she chose, I knew she would find me again. And deep in the forest, the orchids swayed gently, almost innocently, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. The forest waits, and she waits with it. I woke trembling, the moon high above, pale and indifferent, and the valley silent except for the distant rustle of leaves. My body ached, my skin still tingling from the witch's touch, and yet, worse than pain, was the memory. Her eyes, coals of hatred and calculation, burned into my mind as if leaving a permanent mark. I tried to tell myself it was over, that the forest had released me. But the orchids, I could still see them, black petals curling like claws, swaying even though the air was still. I had survived, but survival had a cost I could not yet measure. I stumbled through the valley toward the village, the ground slick with dew, each step carrying the echo of branches breaking behind me. Every shadow seemed alive, moving, testing me. I wanted to scream, to call for someone, anyone, but the forest had stolen my voice. Each breath came ragged and shallow, and I realized the curse wasn't only in the forest. It had followed me, seeped into my blood. By the time I reached the edge of the village, the first faint lights of dawn stretched over the mountains. The villagers were beginning their morning chores, unaware of the terror that lurked just beyond the trees. I wanted to warn them, to tell them of the witch, but the words stuck in my throat. Even saying her name aloud felt like calling her closer. "Black Orchid," I whispered silently, shivering. That night I dreamt, and in the dream, I was back in the forest. The orchids grew taller, blacker, pulsating with a faint red glow, as though feeding on the fear of all who had entered. And the witch, she was there, standing beneath a gnarled tree that stretched higher than any mountain I had seen. Her eyes now burning gold, and the air itself seemed to bend around her. "You survived the first trial," she said, her voice a lullaby and a curse, echoing through the dream as though the forest itself spoke. "But you carry my mark. The Black Orchids remember. And so do I." I woke screaming, my body drenched in cold sweat. Something had been brushing my arm in the night, a soft, fleeting touch. But when I opened my eyes, I was alone. Or so I thought, for days after, shadows moved in the corner of my vision. Shapes twisted unnaturally. Every foggy morning, I could smell the sharp scent of rot and orchids. Faint, but undeniable. It followed me, threading through my life, a whisper of the witch's presence. Curiosity drove me back to the forest, against every instinct screaming for me to stay away. I needed to understand what had marked me. I needed to know the truth of the Black Orchids. As I stepped into the mist, the familiar dread returned immediately. The air thickened, the fog curling around my ankles like living snakes. Every step felt heavier, every breath more labored. And then I saw them. Hundreds of orchids, black as midnight, clustered at the base of an ancient tree. Their petals glimmered faintly in the moonlight. And at their center, a human skull, worn smooth, embedded as if part of the bloom itself. The witch emerged again, silent, her movements fluid, unnatural. "You come back," she said, eyes narrowing. "Few dare return after the trial. Fewer still understand the consequences." I tried to run, but my legs felt like lead. My mind was a storm of fear and disbelief. She stepped closer, and I felt the forest shift with her. Branches twisting, fog coiling. "The orchids are not merely flowers," she said. "They are vessels. Vessels for the fear, the sorrow, the despair of all who trespass. And now, they are yours." The air grew thick with whispers, voices of those long lost in the forest. I recognized fragments of their final cries. The orchids trembled, and I realized with horror that the whispers were not just in my ears. They were in my head. Each petal pulsed with memory, anguish, pain, and slowly I understood. This forest had claimed countless victims. I was not her first, and if I faltered, I would not be the last. "You survived by running," she said, her voice gentle now, terrifying in its intimacy. "But running does not free you. The orchids will follow, the curse will follow, and one day, if you falter, it will take you completely." Then, as swiftly as she appeared, she vanished. Only the orchids remained, swaying in the unnatural stillness. I sank to the ground, tears streaking my dirt-smeared face, and whispered a prayer I didn't believe. I had survived, but I knew with a cold certainty that survival was merely the beginning. The curse had been planted, a seed in the soil of my mind. And one day, if I was careless, it would bloom fully, and the witch would return. As I left the forest, the fog began to clear. Birds sang, sunlight broke through the canopy. Yet even in the light, I could feel it, something watching, patient, waiting. The black orchids had chosen me, and the witch's trial had only just begun. I thought returning home would bring relief. I thought the sunlight, the familiar walls of the village, the smell of cooking fires would cleanse me of the witch's forest. I was wrong. The curse traveled with me. I could feel it in the air, heavy, pressing, whispering just beyond hearing. Shadows in corners didn't move the way shadows should. They stretched, coiled, lingered longer than light allowed. At first I told myself I was imagining it, that the fear, the memory of the orchids and the witch had driven me to madness. But then the villagers began to notice too. It started small. Children would cry at night, pointing at nothing, babbling about a lady in black with flowers in her hair. Dogs growled at the empty air, refused to sleep, and cats hissed at corners where no one stood. And I realized with a sinking horror that I wasn't alone in feeling her presence. Wherever I went, whispers followed. Quiet at first, then louder, speaking in languages I did not know, yet somehow understood. Words of warning, of malice, of promises I didn't want to hear but could not unhear. By the second week, the curse began to manifest physically. Shadows crept across walls in shapes that resembled twisted limbs. Floors groaned as if under invisible feet. Doors slammed without wind. At night I woke to find orchids growing from the cracks in the floorboards, black petals curling toward me like claws, their centers pulsing with the faint red glow I had seen in the forest. I tried to burn them, tried to pull them out, but they grew faster than I could destroy them. Every attempt only seemed to make them stronger, feeding on my fear. One night, I heard her, not in the forest, not in the whispers, but in my own room. A slow, deliberate tapping on my window. I froze, heart pounding, and the tapping became a scratch, a claw dragging across the glass. I dared not look, but the wind carried her voice anyway. Soft, lilting, mocking. "You cannot hide," she whispered. "The orchids remember, and so do I." I tried to leave the village, to escape, but roads twisted, unfamiliar even though I had walked them my whole life. Every turn brought me back to the same square, the same well where children had once played. And at the well's edge, I saw them, the black orchids, rising taller than me, petals brushing the stone rim, stems twisting unnaturally. And above them, she hovered, hair tangled and black, eyes glowing gold. Watching, I ran. But the ground shifted beneath me, roots grabbing at my ankles, shadows stretching to seize me. I realized then that the curse was no longer bound to the forest. It had followed me home. The villagers whispered rumors about me. They said I had been cursed by the witch of the forest. They said anyone who saw her survived only to carry the mark, a shadow that would grow until it consumed them. Some avoided me completely. Others crossed themselves when I passed. I understood their fear. I shared it, but I also knew I could not hide forever. The worst came one night when the village was quiet. I was walking past the temple, the old stone one near the edge of the square, when I felt her presence behind me. Not a shadow, not a whisper, but weight. A suffocating, pressing force that made my knees buckle. I turned slowly, and she was there, floating, impossible, her robes black as midnight and her hair writhing like snakes. The orchids had followed her, curling around her like living armor. Her eyes were on me, and I felt my chest tighten as if her gaze alone could crush me. "You've brought them with you," she said, voice a melody of rage and amusement. "And now the village will remember. Fear will feed them, and through fear my power grows." I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything. But the shadows moved first. They spilled from the corners of the village, thick, tangible, and closing in. Children screamed, dogs barked frantically. I could feel their panic feeding the curse. The orchid swayed, growing taller, stems curling around houses, roots tearing through walls. And above it all, the witch laughed, a sound that made the ground shake and their taste of ash. I remembered the monks from the distant story of my father's friend, the tales of prayer and chants. I tried it myself, whispering every prayer I knew, every name I could call on. For a moment the shadows stuttered, the orchids trembled and she hesitated. But only for a moment. Her grin widened, impossibly, teeth glinting in the moonlight, and she pointed a finger at me. "You cannot stop what has begun. The Black Orchids choose, and they have chosen you." I ran, zigzagging through the village streets, the ground shaking with every step. Roots ripped through cobblestones, petals sliced through wood, and the wind carried her laughter, mocking and eternal. I reached the river at the village edge, thinking maybe, just maybe I could cross. And she would not follow. But even the water seemed alive. Black petals floating on the surface, forming shapes, letters, words I could not read but understood. Somewhere in that chaos, I knew a truth I could not ignore. The witch had marked me for life, and the village, my home, had become her new forest. I had survived the trial in the mountains, but the curse was not over. It had moved with me, grown with me, and it would not end until she chose to claim me fully, or until I found a way to break it. As dawn crept over the horizon, casting pale light over the chaos, I collapsed by the river, trembling. The orchids receded slightly, shadows pulling back, but I could still feel them, whispering, waiting. The witch was gone for now, but her laughter lingered in my ears, in the walls, in the pulse of the village. And I understood, with cold certainty, that nothing would ever be the same again. The Black Orchids had followed me into the world of the living, and the forest, with its witch and its shadows, was no longer confined to the mountains. I never thought I would see nightfall again in that village, not with her watching, not with the Black Orchids twisting through every corner like living chains. Every step I took felt heavier, weighed down by a presence I could neither fight nor flee. The whispers followed me into every room, under every bed, through every street, curling around my throat like smoke. I could no longer tell where the curse ended and my own fear began. That night, I knew she would come. There was no question. The wind carried her voice, soft at first, like silk brushing my ears, then cutting into me like a blade. "You cannot hide," she murmured. "You brought them to life, and now you will witness the bloom." I ran to the river, the only place I could think might offer some protection. Water was supposed to cleanse, wash away evil. But even the river seemed tainted. Black petals floated on its surface, forming concentric circles that pulsed like a heartbeat. As I stared, they rose from the water, twisting into shapes of hands, faces, mouths, screaming silently. The water wasn't water anymore. It was a mirror of the forest, a portal, and I realized with a cold horror that I had nowhere to run. And then she appeared. She floated above the riverbank, impossibly tall, robes flowing like ink spilling in slow motion, hair whipping as if caught in a storm that existed only around her. The orchids had grown into monstrous forms, stems thick as tree trunks, petals sharp as blades, coiling toward me, roots plunging deep into the earth like sentinels. She smiled, and in that smile I could feel centuries of malice, of every fear she had ever sown, every soul she had claimed. "You have carried my children," she said, pointing toward the orchids, now writhing and twisting like snakes, "and they are ready to bloom." Before I could react, the ground beneath me shook violently. Roots burst through the riverbank, wrapping around my ankles, yanking me toward the largest of the black orchids. Its petals opened slowly, like a predator unveiling its maw, revealing a core glowing red, pulsing, almost breathing. I screamed, but the sound seemed swallowed by the night, absorbed into the darkness she commanded. I clawed at the roots, but they only tightened. I felt my arms scratch and tear against bark that was harder than stone. The orchid's thorns dug into my skin, and I realized with a visceral shock that their petals were alive. Alive in the way that creatures with intent are alive. And then the whispering began again, louder, chanting, voices overlapping, speaking in the ancient language of the cursed forest. I understood them, though no sane mind should. They were calling me, naming me, binding me, folding me into the bloom. The witch descended closer, eyes glowing gold, burning into me. Her hands moved in a slow, deliberate motion, and the air thickened, suffocating. She whispered of the forest, of the orchids, of power beyond the human mind. Every word was a dagger twisting into my soul. "You are mine," she said. "You chose to enter my world. Now you will witness the end of the veil between life and death." And then the petals moved. They detached from their stems like wings and formed shapes in the air. Figures, shadows of the people the witch had taken over centuries. I recognized some of them. Missing villagers, travelers, even children I had seen playing near the edges of the forest. Their mouths opened in silent screams, eyes pleading, and they reached for me. I staggered back, but the roots had me, dragging me closer to the bloom, closer to her. I remembered my father's stories, the whispers of monks, the prayers that had once kept evil at bay. I began to chant, hands trembling, voice shaking, invoking every prayer I could recall, every name of protection I had learned. For a moment, the world paused. The petals quivered, the roots loosened slightly, and I dared to lift my eyes. The witch snarled, a sound like the breaking of trees, the tearing of flesh, and she lunged, robes swirling, hair whipping like black fire. I rolled to the side, just as the largest orchid's petals slammed into the earth where I had been. I scrambled toward the river, praying the water would take me, shield me, save me. The petals followed, curling, snapping, the figures in their center wailing. I dove into the river. Cold, biting, unnatural currents pulled me under. For a heartbeat, I thought I had escaped, but the water wasn't safe. Petals closed around me, roots shot from below, tangling, twisting, pulling me into the bloom. I screamed, fists thrashing, heart hammering as I felt the pull of centuries of dark power. The witch's laughter echoed in my ears, a sound that would haunt me forever. And then, suddenly, the bloom released me. I shot to the surface, gasping, coughing, lungs burning. The river carried me downstream, fast, merciless, and I didn't dare look back. But I felt her still, a presence riding the currents, in the mist, in the night air, marking me. I had survived, but barely. My body was shredded, my mind raw with terror, and I understood that the witch's reach extended far beyond the forest. The black orchids would bloom again. Weeks later, when I finally returned to the village, it was quiet. Too quiet. The villagers avoided my gaze. Children refused to leave their homes. Dogs cowered at my approach, and I knew why. She had marked me as the harbinger, And through me, the forest's curse would grow, always waiting, always watching, always ready for the next bloom. Some nights, when the wind carries a scent of black petals, I swear I can see her silhouette among the trees, floating, eyes glowing, smiling. And I know, with every fiber of my being, that she is patient. The forest never forgets, and neither does the witch who rules it. I survived, but I am no longer a boy. I am a witness, and the black orchids bloom in shadows, and through them, she waits for the next soul, foolish enough to enter her domain. And I will never forget her.